Welcome to my channel, Geezer Talks Climate, and today what I want to do is just step back and take a big picture look at the financing and investment that we have in terms of trying to eliminate or reduce global warming due to the emission of greenhouse gases. And just a reminder that we emit 50 billion tons of greenhouse gas every year globally, and we set a target back in the Paris Agreement. And if you need an update on what the Paris Agreement is, just visit my YouTube playlist. But we set a target of not exceeding 1.5 degrees centigrade global warming over the baseline. And last year, 2024, we blew past that goal that we said we wouldn't exceed. So we're not doing enough to address the changing climate. But what are we doing? So we're setting aside about $500 billion over the next 10 years, and that comes by way of three things. One, the Inflation Reduction Act. Two, the Infrastructure Act. And three, the CHIPS Act. And these are targeted towards several sort of industry sectors. And you can see from this graphic behind me now that transportation and power are the two that have the that gain the most impact from this investment. Transportation has to do with improved efficiencies and the move towards electric vehicles over the next 10 years. And power has to do with using renewable energy, solar, wind, and investment in nuclear power to address our United States power requirements. Now you can see from the same graphic that it's tougher to do other sectors like industry. That's just a tough one because powering industry still is going to require a significant level of fossil fuels. So we have to go over after the ones where we have solutions and can make headway, and that's in transportation and power. Now, just to contrast that $500 billion that we're investing in our future and our environment to combat global warming, we are investing, or the Office of Congressional Budget Office is allocating over $600 billion for nuclear weapons development. So that's $500 billion that we're spending or planning to spend for climate change, and more than that for nuclear weapons development, which from my perspective doesn't make much sense, but that is the way we're budgeting right now. So the $500 billion that we're budgeting for climate is not enough, and I'll get to that in just a second. So let's step back for a minute and just look at the overall picture and the two administrations, Biden and Trump administration, and what our targets are. So that black line shows the emissions over time, and this is just the U.S. component only. And the good news is we are reducing emissions. And the Biden administration set a target of hitting 50% of the emissions that we had in 2006, which is when we peaked with our emissions. So we have been decreasing, and our target, partially based on the Paris Agreement, was 50% of those peak emissions. And so you can see under the Biden administration that there was a steep drop in the blue area there, and that has to do with the investment that's come from these three things I just mentioned: the Inflation Reduction Act, the Infrastructure Act, and the CHIPS Act. So that looks to be more or less on target. But then it starts to swing out and get less ambiguous because the Biden administration has ended and their long-term planning wasn't there beyond these three laws that were enacted. Now, what is the likelihood or the likely effect of the Trump administration? Well, we already know that he's planning to roll back as much of this as possible. Now, some of these things and from the laws that were enacted have already been spent or are, in the process of being allocated. So there may not be a lot that can happen there, but what we have to look at is the rollback over time and see what that actually looks like in practice over the next year or so. And I'll certainly be monitoring the Department of Energy's webpage and other agencies that report the impact of spending. So while I've looked at the big picture of federal spending, what I'd like to just comment on here towards the end is that there's private industry spending as well, which we desperately need. So here's an example I just reported recently on Instagram. The Natrium next generation nuclear plant the construction has now recently begun in Wyoming. And this is a joint investment, $2 billion coming from the Inflation Reduction Act and $2 billion coming from private investors. Warren Buffett and Bill Gates play a big role in that one. Bill Gates has a venture capital group called Breakthrough Technologies where he funds a lot of these next generation projects, and there are many, but this Natrium plant is just one that's been in the news just lately. So the investment is happening. It's not enough. We need more. We are not on target to reduce global warming to the extent that we need to be, but we need to get behind these investments, both government and private. If you want to know more about climate change in general, visit my YouTube playlist. There's 6 or 7 videos that take you through the basics. Thanks for tuning in.